part of who we are and how we get through every day. I heard an expression from someone that said, your life was speaking so loudly, I couldn't hear what you said. So most of the time, people aren't as concerned with what we have to say. They're concerned more with what we are. And that's what they're watching. And for children, that's what they're modeling. So we need to model the right stuff. Paul was able to say in 1 Corinthians 11:1, be imitators of me, just as I also am an imitator of Christ. That's kind of hard to say, isn't it? I'd almost be afraid to say that to somebody. Be an imitator of me. Because I slip and fall all the time. But that's the kind of lifestyle the Lord's looking for. And he tells us in Luke 6:40, everyone after they've been fully trained will be like their teacher. So we need to give this some thought. We need to do a pretty good job of modeling the scriptures we're speaking to them. They have to have some kind of a change and impact on us, so the kids can see that lived down. I had a friend who was a fighter pilot in Vietnam, then went on to fly for the Blue Angels. I met him in one of our older church, and he was telling me one day about he had 3 sons. One of them was probably this big, and they were going through the mall, the shopping mall down in Pleasanton. And as they passed the sporting goods store, the shoe store, I think it was Foot Locker, he said, Dad, can you buy me those tennis shoes? And Mike said, I can't. We don't have the money. And the little guy said, well, that's okay, just write a check. That's kind of an interesting comment, isn't it? Just write a check. See, the fact of the matter was that the little guy didn't connect the fact that Dad had to go to work every day and work his tail off to make the money that he got a paycheck for, that he put into the bank so that he could write a check. There wasn't a link. It was just write a check. My granddaughter did that when she was younger. She made a menu, and then she made believe going to serve us a meal. And then she handed me a crayon and a piece of paper to write her a check. That's all. If you just write it, then that works. It becomes money. And yet we're not modeling how that works. So we have verbal communication. We need to teach our children. Second, we need to model it. We need to live out what the scriptures are that the Lord is speaking to us and that we're trying to share with the children. It has to be important enough that it makes a difference in our life. And then third, through practical experience. So we can say it, we can live it out in front of them, and then third, we need to give them an opportunity to practice what they're learning. And I think we fail big time in this area. As we're raising up children, they just don't get the practical application part of this. And so it's just words. Kids need an opportunity to apply what they learn, and if they're going to make mistakes, it would be far better to make them then when they're younger, and there's not as much at risk, as it will be later when the consequences could be a lot more severe. And so the more we can train them and let them practice it early. As I started learning this, we started teaching our children, and one of the things we did, we started with an allowance. And then we gave them some opportunities to make some additional money if they wanted to maybe buy something a little more expensive than the allowance would allow. Well, I use that as a training opportunity. When we gave the kids an allowance, we also gave them a checkbook register. And I would write the allowance in the register. And I tell them, now when here's the allowance, I want you to honor God first. I want you to save a portion of it. And we kind of help them through those steps. And then third, you can spend what's left, but every single time you use any of the money, write it in the check register and subtract it. And at the end of the month, when it's time for another allowance, if the checkbook register balances, you get your next allowance. If it doesn't, bye-bye. All 3 kids learned how to balance their checkbook. They didn't have checks in it, but that's the easy part. Anybody can write a check. It's figuring out how much you got to write the check against. That's the tough part. And so we picked that up as just one opportunity. When they got a little bit older, we did the same thing with credit card, with a very small balance. You could use it for anything that was in their budget, but it had to be paid at the end of the month. And if it isn't, we cut up the card, you're done. And I've got 3 kids today that each have 1 credit card. They pay the balance off every month. They don't have any debt. And it's just simply trying to follow some of the principles God has given us. On the expense side, from the very beginning, we tried to teach them to give, to save, and then to spend. And we used every opportunity we could to teach them about giving, why you gave and how God used it or how it was being used, why you needed to save, and then how you considered the spending you did. One of the things we use, it is still available today, Crown Financial Ministries has what's called an ABC Bank. It's just 3 compartments, and one of them looks like a church, and the middle one looks like a bank. So you give here, and then you put your savings here, and then the other side is for spending. It was just a simple process to teach them how to compartmentalize these pieces. As they got older, you use other tools. But as we went along the way, trying to teach them these principles, we found that God used it in some incredible ways. And we had an opportunity here a couple of years ago down in Southern California with my granddaughter, Kenna. She asked me if I had money, which is what grandkids do to their grandparents. Do you have any money, Poppy? I said, well, sure, I have a little. Why? And she said, well, somebody broke my crayons. Really? And I was sitting in their family room looking out the glass doors in the backyard, and in the middle of their patio was just a collage of colors where the crayons had melted. They live down in Temecula, down in Southern California, and it's about 610 degrees during the summer. And so I said, well, did somebody break your crayons out there on the patio? And then her head just dropped, and her chin hit her chest. And I just hear her say, yeah, I forgot them. I said, well, hey, people make mistakes. I mean, it happens all the time. Let's go get some crayons. So we went to the store, and her mom said, just get her one of those little skinny boxes, because I'm going to get her a big box later. And I said, okay. So we went, and it was only, I don't know what those were, like 50 cents, 60 cents or something. It was just this little skinny thing with 6 crayons or something. But I thought, wow, what an opportunity. So I said, okay, well, let's go back up to the counter. And I asked the gal at the counter, gave her $1, and said, could you give me 10 dimes? So she looked at me kind of crazy, and she gave me 10 dimes, and we went back to the crayons, and I said, okay, Kenna, here's the deal. When Jesus comes to live in your heart, there's some things he wants us to do. One of them, he wants us to take some part of what we have and put it back into work at church to help people who have needs or problems, worse than ours. And she said, okay. And I said, and then he wants us to take a portion of it and save it. And there's all kinds of scriptures you can use to teach them. Joseph is a perfect example of saving. And she said, okay. Well, see, when they're 5 or 6 years old, they'll say okay to anything. So that's a great time to start teaching them. And then she said, what do we do with the rest? And I said, anything you want. Spend it on anything. So we bought the crayons. She got change back. What do I do with this? Whatever you want. You can give a little bit more away. You can save some more, or you can just spend it. And her eyes were like this big. Well, we came home. A couple of weeks later, my son called, and he said, Dad, you're not going to believe this. They said, Kenna came home the other day and she asked us, how does Jesus come to live in your heart? And so Michelle and I just sat down with her and explained how you could give your life to Jesus and have him come live in your heart. And she said, and so if something bad ever happens to you or Mommy, you're going to be with Jesus? And they said, yeah. Well, what about if something bad ever happens to Grammy or Poppy? Will they be with Jesus? And Greg said, yeah. I said, well then I want